Hello, lovely folks of YouTube, Ren here. So, I want to talk about something that I kind of touched on a little bit in sort of my beginner, getting started in witchcraft video, and that is spell work, spell crafting, making your own spells, casting spells. It's basically like the heart of witchcraft. It is the craft that we talk about when we're talking about witchcraft. First, I want to give a caveat. This video I'm probably going to have to make in several phases. I've been trying to get this video made for a good 2 weeks now, and I keep getting called into work. And I had set aside today to get it done, and then I get called into work. So I have about 30 minutes before I gotta get my shit together and run out the door. I'm going to try and film as much as I can in that time, but you may see me have to take a break, change outfits because it'll be another day of filming, but I'll do as much as I can right now. So let's dive into it. This is a huge subject. This is not a subject that I can cover anything and everything that you need to know in a 15-minute video. And I try to keep it to 15 minutes or less if I can, because I have a short attention span, and I'm sure y'all do too. I just can't sit through an hour-long video. I will sometimes listen to long podcasts if I can crochet at the same time, but I can't just sit and watch a thing for more than 15 minutes. So that's my goal. But I can't cover this subject in 15 minutes. I'm just going to touch on the highlights, some of the basic stuff for the beginners. And even if you're not a beginner, you may get some new information out of this, so stick around, Now, first I want to define what I see spell crafting or spell work is. It is basically an act of co-creation with the divine, whatever your perception of that may be, in order to bend reality to fit your needs. And this is a big part of where some of that, that probably false etymology comes about, how witches are, it means to bend or shape, because spell work is basically bending what's happening in order to better fit a path that you want to have occur. Now, here's the trick, is that when you're bending reality, it still has to stay within reality. So basically, you're just kind of skewing the odds in your favor. If the odds are astronomically against you, any spell work you do is not going to work. This is why spell work to win the lottery doesn't happen. It's just not going to happen. Those odds, just even numerical odds, are astronomically against you. It's like 1 in 1.5 billion or something ridiculous like that. I don't know. I used to know when I took my statistics class, but that's all trash that got thrown out of my brain a long time ago. But yeah, so not only are those odds astronomically against you, but you also have everybody else who is buying a ticket is basically putting their energy into trying to win and stop you from winning. So that's why lotto is not going to work. What you can do, though, is you can use your spell work to increase the chances of something that you are already giving a physical avenue of a realistic way to happen. So say, for example, you want a job. That's far more realistic, because if you look at, if you're applying to a particular job, you may be 1 out of a dozen, 1 out of 2 dozen, maybe 1 out of 30, 50, that's still a very small, the odds are not great, but they're realistic odds. That's something that can physically happen. And of course, doing your spell work can increase those odds in your favor. Increase the odds in your favor. However, you still have to apply to the job, or else your odds are 0 and magic isn't going to work. You still have to touch up your resume. You still have to go do the interview and make a good impression. You can use spell work to assist you in those things, but you still have to do that physical work, that groundwork, to give a direct path for that magic to work through. So, not having a good physical avenue for your magic to work, that's where you hear all the the urban legend wives' tales about the people who do prosperity magic and say I need some money to pay this bill, and then next thing you know, they have a sudden inheritance from a family member that dies. They didn't say how they wanted that money. They didn't give a realistic path for it to work. And so it just found whatever avenue it could. Yeah. So for that reason, that's why I always recommend when you're first formulating your spell, when you're thinking about, okay, this is the thing that I want, you have to be real detail oriented. And not just say like, I want money or I want a job. You have to be specific. I always recommend doing what, and this is not exclusive to magic. This is out there everywhere, using SMART goals. If you're not familiar with that acronym, it's SMART. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based goals. Okay. So say, for example, you say, okay, I need a job. I'm going to do some magic to get a job. If you just put that out there as it is, it's not very specific. It's not time-based. Like, yeah, you may get a job. You may get a job at McDonald's 6 months later. Technically, the spell worked because you weren't specific. You didn't put a time limit on it. You know, it may not be the job you want, but it was a job. Nothing against working at McDonald's. It's just that for a lot of the time, that's not the job that somebody wants. So give yourself a specific, measurable goal. I want a job in my field that pays this amount of money, only works me for this number of hours per week, because that's important too, and doesn't have a toxic work environment. So much more specific. Also a little more measurable too. Say you want that job you want to start in that job within 3 months. Time-based. And then attainable. Realistic means you're actually doing the physical work to get that job, and you actually have qualifiers to get that job as well. Like, I couldn't go out there and do magic to just be like, say, I want to be a veterinarian. I don't have any of the skills or training to be a veterinarian. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But say if I wanted a better position in my field, nursing, that's more realistic. That's something I can work with. So use those SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. Put a time limit. Say, I want this to happen within this amount of time. Otherwise, it could be 3 years that you're waiting. You don't want to be doing that if you need something now. So, all right, so let's talk about the actual physical components of spell work, making a spell, and what that entails. I always think of spell work as sort of in the same vein as cooking, okay? You have a recipe, and if you're not very familiar with cooking, you're probably just going to stick to that recipe and just do what that recipe says. And you, depending on your skill, you may pull it off or you may not, because, you know, a recipe can just give you the basic components, but putting the actual work into it is a skill that takes practice. It's similar with spell work. You may have a spell, somebody else may write up a spell, it'll have specific components to it. You can put those components together following that recipe, and it may work or it may not, depending on what your actual skill is. Just like cooking, the best way to build up those skills and get better at the thing is to do the thing. You can't get better at cooking by just watching the Cooking Network. You have to actually physically get your hands onto some food and prep and cook and do all those things, or else you're never going to get any better. Also, like cooking, you don't want to jump into the most difficult, complicated thing possible first, because you're definitely going to screw it up. Start small, build those skills, and work your way up. You know, you don't start cooking with, you know, right out the door, you know, starting with a beef Wellington. Most people who start with cooking, they start with omelets. The most basic thing. They're learning how to crack the egg. They're learning how to flip the omelet. They're learning how, you know, where they have to have the heat at in order to have it just right so that it's not burning or undercooking or cooking too slowly. So, same thing with spell work. You're going to start with your most basic spells that don't have a lot of ridiculous components to them, and you're just going to practice with them and figure out what works and what doesn't, and go from there. Now, much like cooking, as you get more experienced, you're going to be able to learn when you can tweak a recipe or a spell, and when you can substitute things and how you can substitute things. Your ingredients, as you're learning to work with those spell components, you're going to get better at knowing, like, okay, well, I don't have frankincense, but I can, replace it with copal or something like that. It comes with experience and practice and study, learning about those correspondences and what they mean and what they represent and how you can play with them in order to actually build the components of a custom spell. I almost never use somebody else's spells as they're written. I always play with them, because the more you customize them and tweak them to your own personal needs, the more effective they're going to be. It's good to start out with other people's spells, at the very least, to get the practice in, but ultimately your goal is to be able to write your own spells and figure out what you want to do based on what you have on hand. You're not going to be wanting to run out and buy all these ridiculous exotic ingredients every single time you want to cast a spell. You want to be able to do what you want to do with what you have on hand, and you can write a spell based on what you have to make it work. The nice thing about Spellwork as opposed to cooking is that we are way more flexible with what we can substitute for our ingredients, because we don't have to worry about how it tastes. We just have to worry about the overall energetic effect of the spell. So, and that's the other thing too, is that ultimately the key ingredient that goes into your spell is the energy of that spell. The physical components and all of those things are really just tools to help reinforce and focus your energy that you're putting into that spell. You can do spell work with nothing but a pen and a piece of paper. You could do spell work with probably with nothing but your own physical will. Just sit there and meditate and put energy out into the universe. It's going to be a little more effective and have a little more oomph, of course, if you have some physical components with it, but realistically you can do spell work with anything. So, for example, like a lot of the tea recipes that I've put out on this channel can be used as spell work. If you're actually putting energy in as you're assembling the tea, you're putting focus into what intent you want that tea to bring about. As you boil the water, as you're steeping the tea, you're focusing your energy on the mug. You're stirring the tea, adding sweetener in order to sweeten that desire that you're putting into it. Those are all things that can go into spell work. So it's partially the ingredients, but also big part just what you're putting into it. And it's not going to go very far if you don't have that good focus. So learning that self-discipline, that focus that you need, that I've talked about in one of my other videos, is also super important. So lots of different physical ways of doing spells. You've got the teas, like I mentioned, crystal grids, poppets, candle spells, jar spells. There's the only limit is really your imagination. Witch bottles are really cool. Those are a fun one. A lot of people will try to pigeonhole themselves and be like, well, I'm a green witch. I only work with herbs. Don't do that. It's okay to have something that plays to your strengths, but when you're first starting out, experiment with everything. Figure out what you're good at, where your skills lie, and also build up those skills in the things that maybe you're not as good at. You may be absolute shit at sewing a poppet together. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to work. If you're putting that focus and energy into it, it'll work. It doesn't matter what it looks like. So don't pigeonhole yourself. This is the time to learn and explore and have fun with it. Do all the things, okay? Took a short break. I might be able to finish this in time. We'll see. All right. So we were talking about the physical components of spellwork. The reason why we do those physical components is there's sort of in some cases, they can be a reserve to sort of hold that energy and then release it into the universe so that it's not drawing on your energy constantly. You put your energy in once, it's a battery that you charge, and then it sets that energy out into the universe without having to further draw from your reserves. I like to think of it, it's a very old reference. Most of you probably won't get it. It's a little old even for me, honestly, but a wind-up clock. I grew up in the days where like most everybody had electric clocks, but my grandmother still had a wind-up clock. You had to wind it every night, and then just the act of physically winding would tighten that spring, and then that spring would gradually release its energy, turning the gears of the clock, which kept time. It's the same concept of your spell work. You're winding the key, tightening that energetic spring, and then it's going to release that energy out into the universe for you. So I want to show you a very, very, very basic spell. This is one that I've talked about before. I think when I did my video on my rue plant, where I talked about how I asperge, usually around Imbolc, I asperge my house with blessed water and a sprig of rue. I'm going to make some blessed water because Imbolc is coming up and I need to do that. So I have my little components here for you. This is spell work. It's very simple spell work, but it's still spell work because I'm putting energy and intent into it. So what I have here, my little mason jar here, this is filled with water. This is just tap water. I literally just got this out of my tap a few minutes ago. I'm keeping it in a mason jar because I'm going to hang on to it for a few days. It'll be fine. So I've got my mason jar of tap water. I'm going to turn this tap water into blessed water, and I'm going to do that by adding this. This is moon water. This is just water, rainwater that I collected that sat under a full moon and got charged by the moon. I'll just add a few drops. There we go. So, through the principle of contagion, the energy that's in that moon water is going to then spread into this water here. And now this water is also moon water. However, in order to further my little blessing here, I'm going to add salt as well. I'm going to do 3 pinches of salt. It really doesn't matter what kind of salt you have. I mean, the more natural, like the less refined it is, the better. But if all you have is Morton's iodized, then go for that. Salt is the cleanest thing that we have magically. So 1, 2, 3 pinches of salt. Just give that a little shake. Now here's the key. This is where the magic happens. Okay? You put your focus and your energy into this water. Put all your thoughts into how the salt and the water together are clean and pure, and make everything they touch clean and pure. As you're putting your focus into this, you're going to imagine, that's what they mean when they say envision, they mean imagine, because most of us don't have the skills to actually see it, but imagine is the next best thing. Imagine that this is glowing with a gentle white light. You can also chant your intention over it. The word enchantment literally means to sing over. So putting a chant or a song into it always helps to bolster your spell work. Does not need to be serious as long as it works for you. So here. Clean and pure, white light lit. Cleanse this space and drive out shit. Here you go. It's now ready to be used for cleansing. That's it. That's the spell right there. Now I'm going to use my sprig of rue to sprinkle this around my house to cleanse my house. You don't want to put it on anything metal that's electronic because the salt in there can corrode that, so stay away from that. But you can also use it to like trace stars or other sigils on your windows in order to cleanse that area and create a wall that will block out any negative energy from coming in. You can use it to cleanse your own energy. Like you could take this and literally just get in the shower and just dump it over your head and let it wash everything down the drain. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can use this for. It's very simple, but it works. So anyway, that's all I have for you today. I'm glad I got this all in on one day. I love y'all. Blessed be, and I hope I'll see you again soon.